We are talking with Father Timothy Hayes, who is a priest in the Diocese of Columbus. In the course of the 36 years that you've been a priest, how has the change in the community affected you as a priest?
Well, in some ways, it's been more watching the whole church and the whole diocese and really the whole world change in how things are. In all the years I've been a priest, numbers of those who are actually attending church in both Catholic and non-Catholic churches have decreased in the United States and around the world. But at the same time, what I see is what used to be done by only priests and religious sisters, for example, in parishes, are now shared ministries. And so really with my whole priesthood, I've just been busy wherever I've been, whether it's been one church or three churches. What's changed is kind of my own internal understanding of it. When I first became a pastor, I used to think that I had to try and meet everybody's expectations. And, very soon you learn that you can't do that. And so you learn that you have to share the load, as it were, and sometimes inviting people to realize they can do some of the things that they thought you should do. When I went through my first pastorate, I kind of wore myself out trying to meet everybody's expectations, but then I came up with the motto, okay, I'll do what I can, and what I can't, I won't. And then I really got more done because the expectation wasn't pushing myself. The next parish where I had, St. Timothy's, that was my second pastorate. Again, it was trying to invite others to take up the load and to be involved in things. And, again, though, the challenge of thinking you have to try to meet people's expectations comes there. Coming down to a consortium of three parishes, I knew right from the start that I could not possibly meet everybody's expectations. So there's a greater freedom in not even trying. So whereas in my last parish, for example, the question of being involved in the online reality, I was the one who did that. I had to learn about how you did live stream and run the different things in the office. And even though I never had training in it, just personally learning it, I was the tech guru. Well, coming down here, mercifully, there were already other people who were doing that. And so, as you mentioned, we live streamed several masses, and in the various parishes have just encouraged them to grow that way. So, for example, during the time that we've had of COVID, being able to be in touch with parishioners who aren't coming to church, so I would say in terms of the biggest change over the years, because of fewer people being involved, and actually there being fewer numbers of priests and clergy, had to learn to share the load. And so it's a collaborative ministry all the way along.
When you discovered that you couldn't do everything and you stepped back, it gave the laity a chance to step up and become more Christian themselves, at least in their actions. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, and really the theology of that has always been there. We're all baptized, we're all responding to Christ, and we all have a ministry that is to share the message of the gospel with the world, and that is a shared ministry right from the start. I think sometimes there are members of the community that don't realize the gift they have to be able to offer to the church. And then when they do, it's just amazing the things that can happen. I know, especially when I've gone into parishes where I've realized, okay, there's more that needs to be done here than I can do, and I'll only be here for a certain number of years. I've always gone into it with a mind that said, I can do what I can do and, be part of this, but it's really got to be a shared ministry so that if it's going to continue for the people, someone locally is there and involved in it. So one of the other changes and challenges that's been there is priests have always had people who help them do things, the sisters or certain lay people and that sort of thing. But what I noticed is in most of the parishes, the model of the priest was a lone ranger. He came in and he did it all. He might have had the help of the sisters and maybe a few of the lay people, but everybody kind of expected the priest to do it all. Well, the first generation of laity that get involved in things, and when there are fewer priests and they can't do it, their model has been the Lone Ranger model. And so what's really had to be developed, especially among the people in the pews, is realizing they have a shared ministry. My first assignment at Blessed Sacrament in Newark, Ohio, as pastor, I realized that community had really been in the hands of an older generation that was early 2 generations ahead of me. And coming in as young, I was in my 30s, suddenly my generation was enfranchised. People who are my age could begin to be involved in the life of the church. And so 2 generations ahead were a little bit envious of that, the one that already still had the reins, and then the one that never got to do it. Well, gradually helping the generations work together has been the challenge. Coming now to a community of 3 parishes, the big challenge is here, each of the 3 parishes is very different. One has cross-generational involvement because the pastor there who preceded me was, as I was, very young when he became a pastor. And so he enfranchised the younger generation. 2 other parishes, the experience has been older priests. And so it's the old folks that are still involved. And, the invitation to draw in the younger generations has been what I've done, which is harder now that I'm old. We're in our 60s,
Yeah,
Patrick.
well,
So
I wasn't going to mention that, Tim, but
it's okay.
But you hit it. We're no longer the younger generation.
We aren't, but we can have enthusiasm like the younger generation has. But when they look at you, they see an old person. I notice our hairs are gray.
You mentioned cross-generational, and one of the things that a priest and sociologist that I'm very familiar with, who has written a book, Community as Church, argues is that one of the major things that has changed is parishes used to have multi-generational studies, and you mentioned your own growing up in a very Catholic family, and with the movement of people around the country, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Is that consistent with what you're seeing out in the parish?
Yes and no. In the parishes I've served, in the Columbus area, most of them were in suburbia, and that was the case. You just had kind of certain generations that were there. In Columbus, they attract a lot of yuppies, young urban professionals, and if they begin their families, they're all still about the same generation. The ones, in Diocese of Columbus, we're 23 counties, and quite a number of those counties are rural. And so my first parish assignment in Newark was, had a rural dimension. And now this area of Ohio is very rural. It still has the feel of cross-generational, except that in Southern Ohio, some of the younger generation will go on to college and just never come back. I had classmates from Notre Dame who were from down here, and they're long gone. But their families, their grandparents, maybe some of their cousins are still around here. And so there is kind of that cross-generational dimension that's still kind of there. But one of the challenges there is they've also become cross-generational in their non-practices. It used to be you had the grown-ups all come to church, and the kids didn't want to, but they were forced to when their parents were home. And then in high school or college, they stopped. And well, nowadays, everybody just kind of quits. And of course, the COVID has added to that, dimension, so
it has, unfortunately, but it's also, and this is an argument that I make, COVID, in one of the very few things it's done a favor to us, is it's forced churches to figure out the technological stuff and things like you were talking about, which allow us to form an online community and reach out to people that we might not otherwise ever get back or get to. So
absolutely.
For example, you talk about live streaming.
Right. Yeah, I learned how to do that very quickly at St. Timothy's. Sorry.
I was just going to say, as did a lot of priests.
Yes. No, I had a smartphone, and the first day it was like, okay, I'll celebrate Mass, but no one's there. But it's like, well, I know you can do this. So within a day or so, I figured out how to do that. And at St. Timothy's, I did that. And then I worked them toward getting a camera and being able to do that. And, you know, there was a meme of Forrest Gump. It said, Forrest Gump was saying, and just like that, my pastor became a televangelist, you know, and
Right.
I thought that's what's happened. But one little example here, I have one parish at St. Mary Queen of the Missions in Waverly, which was not at all technologically advanced. It was the one parish that didn't do any live streaming. It didn't have online giving, that sort of thing. And their sense was, well, their parishioners were older. They weren't going to be able to do that. And what happened was, most interesting, I said, you know, if we want to appeal to the next generations, we have to lay the groundwork for that. We need to have, as it were, the superhighway for them to come when they're going to be involved with it. And so gradually we got them started with online giving, which was helpful. And, you know, of course, helps during COVID when people aren't coming to church and using collection baskets to be able to give. But then I also said, we really need to look toward getting Wi-Fi and getting a live stream. And at one point, I'm not in the iPhone world or the iWorld, I'm more Android, and that one parish was using an iPad for its live streaming. And so I bought one. As it turned out, that parish eventually got a camera and so didn't need the iPad anymore. The smaller parish, I said, here's this iPad that I bought. It can be used. By the very next week, someone in the community was able to start them live streaming, you know, so for me, that was wonderful. They took some steps forward. And, you know, again, I see that as a connection for the future.
Well, here we are back physically in church, but we are still Zooming and doing hybrid services. And we see that as sort of a permanent way going forward. I wonder if that fits with your belief.
That's my belief, yeah. Different priests have different ideas about that. There are some who say, well, we're just making it too easy for the people to be there. And so by way of online, and so they don't come, but they just watch it. My sense is that's not very many folks. I think we are, as you were suggesting, reaching more people that we wouldn't have been reaching. And where I see that, you know, in keeping communities together, for example, one mother was just so excited back when I was at St. Timothy's. Her son was deployed overseas and he was able to connect with the parish mass from St. Timothy's from overseas. And there wasn't one available where he was. And one of
we can bring the multi-generational diaspora, we can bring back together.
Exactly. Exactly. And there are people, you know, down here, same thing. They're just so grateful that it's available.
Attendance at Sunday is an important part of being Christian. But some of what I would suggest is that what you go out and do and the way you spread the word of God during the week is perhaps even more important than Sunday attendance. And just would like your perspective on that.
I think it's a matter of integrating all of that. Again, right now, COVID has been a great challenge. You know, when I came down here, we were still in the midst of COVID. One of the 3 parishes had not yet opened up again. So most of my time in the year and a half I've been here has been concentrated on working toward that. In terms of involvement, again, it's how parishes are. And both of the parishes in Chillicothe and also the parish down in Waverly have always had a sense of reaching out. You know, the St. Vincent de Paul societies have been very active, even during the time of COVID. I mean, one parish in particular, they had developed having a food pantry. Well, because of COVID, that had to be shut down. So they said, we still need to somehow connect with people. And so what
I'm smiling because ours is our food bank is 2 days from now. We will be distributing food to probably 200 families from a small parish. Great. So I understand exactly what you're talking about.
What they did was, when they discovered they couldn't open, they decided that once a month they would have outdoor giving, and they got the Knights of Columbus involved in that. And so as they're opening the food pantry again, we're realizing we can keep both of those going. You know, you have the food pantry for those who can come in and once a week or so, you know, find what their needs are and get those taken care of. And then once a month, you get the volunteers come in. And, you know, one of the principles I have about it is you give it all away and Providence will supply what you need for the next one. You know, there's still some folks at times who have the mentality, well, we can only give so much away, so we have some for the next one. It's like, I don't think that's how spirituality works. You give it all away, let people know that you need more, and they come up with it. And people are very generous. The other parish in town, St. Mary's, has kept its St. Vincent de Paul alive by just going to, you know, online. So 2 days a week, they have parishioners who come in with a whole troop of cell phones, and they have people connect with the folks who are asking and call the, you know, people that they help them with their rent or with their need for food. They give them vouchers at this particular store, that sort of thing. And then in addition to that, there's a group they made up, you know, just simple bags where people can come to the door when the church is open, when the church office is open, and they give them directly, you know, bags of food. And so people rely on that. So again, where there's a will, there's a way, and people keep reaching out. And then in addition to that, I mean, the greater hunger ultimately in our country isn't for the food, because there's always generosity of food. In fact, some places had so much food that they were trying to find a way to give it away. And so our food pantry got more food to give away because the government couldn't find places to give it away, you know. The greater need is spiritual. And again, the online world has really helped a lot with that. A number of folks, you know, follow various online programs, both through Facebook and otherwise.
Is the consortium method of going forward a reaction to declining attendance, or is it declining availability of priests?
Both.
Or maybe a little bit of both?
Yeah, definitely both. In fact, the Diocese of Columbus right now is going through a whole process called Real Presence, Real Future, to look at all the parishes. And what they're looking at right now is they look at the year 2030, they expect to have 60 priests available to be pastors, probably 72 priests available according to the actuarial tables and such. But at least a dozen parishes will be very large and need at least 2 priests. So they're expecting in that year to have 60 priests available to be pastors. Right now we have about 104, 105 parishes as a diocese. And so realistically speaking, they're saying we need to change.
I don't think Monsignor Gallon could make that math work.
I'm sorry? Yes, that's
I
exactly
said,
right.
I don't think even Monsignor Gallon could make that math work. So
No, but he would see the glory of God in whatever was happening, you know, even the algebraic table.
he would indeed. So he would indeed. So one of the things that I have urged at our church is I hate the word outreach. I understand it's a word that people use in church speak, but to me, using the word outreach implies that you are reaching out to somebody who is not part of your community. And I think the church needs to be an integral part of the community so that you are just being community involved rather than reaching out. I just ask you how you feel about that.
Absolutely. I mean, personally, you know, some people ask, well, how do you do this? I mean, as I said, I've been a priest for 36 years, and the ups and downs of priesthood, the wonder is that you have the stamina to keep going. For me, I do my best to keep my eyes on the goal. And for us, the goal isn't just to have a success as a Catholic church. Our goal is to really help the whole world come together. And the one thing that I've seen, you know, through my experience of studying overseas and experiencing life in the United States, you know, after that and all that, is the world is at once becoming very small and very isolated. And it's to try and find the middle ground with that. You know, the people who don't come to church are still members of our families. And, you know, our outreach, as you say, isn't reaching out to someone who's beyond us. It's to the neighbor who's right there. you know. And one of the movements that's really been inspirational for me is a movement called the Focolare movement, Focolare, which means hearth place. And its goal really ultimately is unity among all peoples. And so as I look at that as the goal, as the unity of everyone, the question becomes, how can we live that right now? And again, it's, to me, it's accepting people where they are, you know, and it's just asking the simple question, what can I do as a simple way to, you know, bring joy to people and to help them realize that we're here for them, and that, you know, that there is hope. You know, if I had to word my whole life ministry as a goal, it would be to be a sign of hope. And that's what it is. And again, growing up in a big family, I realized my way isn't the only way. You know, having 6 brothers and a sister who all do it differently than I do, and it works. Maybe not as well as I would do it, but you know, the reality is we can find a way together. You know.
We can't let the quest for perfection get in the way of what works
Right.
sometimes. With 3 parishes under your auspices, sort of a mini diocese within a diocese almost. What's your typical Sunday schedule like with the mass schedule? Do you bounce around from church to church, or
Right.
or
Yeah.
what?
Between the 3 parishes, we have 6 masses. And I have a parochial vicar right now, which, you know, who knows how long that will be. And then there's also a priest who's a religious priest in residence who does ministry in hospitals and the local prisons here in Chillicothe. I have created kind of a complicated schedule where we cover those 6 masses over each weekend. And at the beginning, just so that they can get to know us all, I've had kind of a round robin sort of thing where each one of us has 2 masses, and except on one of the weekends, we're in one parish. So one weekend, one of us will have 2 masses at St. Peter's, one will have 2 masses at St. Mary's, and then the other will have a mass at St. Peter's on Saturday, and then the one mass at St. Mary, Queen of the Missions in Waverly. And little by little, that, you know, people have gotten used to that. I'm ready to begin, once COVID kind of pulls off its restrictions with things, to maybe come up with other possibilities. For example, during Lent and Easter, having one priest at one place, you know, just to experience that whole season together. I'm going to try that. And, you know, I suspect that, you know, given the term limits that we have, I'll be here 6 to 12 years, and that reaches the time of when I would be old enough to retire. I'll be able to kind of experiment with different approaches. The one question in all of that, though, is what happens when we only have one priest assigned to the parish? In that time, we're going to have to change the way we do it. We can't have 2 masses at the same time or overlapping times. So that'll be a
Or we're going to have to get Star Trek technology in so we can beam you from parish to parish.
And it won't happen.
And then how do you split up the pastoral care responsibilities amongst the 3 of you and the 3 parishes?
Well, basically, whoever's here is kind of responsible for whatever the need is. I'm pretty much at this point the one who does the administration, though I'm trying to share now and then some aspects of the administration with the other ones. And then for the pastoral ministry, for example, when all 3 of us are here, the other 2 priests will kind of take care of that while I'm doing the administrative stuff. But for example, we have our school. All 3 of us have masses at the grade school, sometimes for individual classes, sometimes for the whole school, depending on the you know, who's present and who's available. The most difficult time really was when I the first summer that I had after being here. Actually, no, I'd been here a year. I got the parochial vicar that I had became a pastor in another place, and I was getting the new parochial vicar but he and the other priest in residence were both away. So I was completely alone for a couple of weeks. And that's when I kind of figured out, okay, for daily masses, we need to do it this way. And I did get some other priests to come in and help for the weekends, but we're not
Okay.
close to the heart of the diocese, so it's really hard to get other priests to come this way. So that's going to be a challenge.
It's something we're very familiar with because we're out in the desert in San Diego, and we are the most isolated parish in our diocese. Although we're going through a transition period, we're very fortunate that we have 2 retired priests who are in our congregation. So they've been stepping up and sharing.
Yeah, we have a deacon, a permanent deacon who helps. But for me, the primary thing has been this. When I first came, I just set as a goal, making sure that we ministers really formed a community together. And actually, when I arrived, there were also 2 seminarians in residence for the summer. So there were 5 of us living in the house and working together. This year, we do have a seminarian who's on a pastoral year. So there are 4 of us living in the house. And we have a couple of nights together where we share a meal and share discussion and reflection and play games together, that sort of thing, you know, forming a community that then can just be flexible enough to work together. And that's really worked out the best way. The model I have really for parish life is family. You create a family, and then the family comes together to do what needs to be done.
I was just thinking when you were talking about the 4 or 5 of you living in the rectory, we just had the feast day, and I know you posted on Facebook about it. We just had a bit on it of St. Anthony the Great, who is considered the father of the monastic community. And your rectory experience reminded me of perhaps the small monastic community that would have been set up by St. Anthony, but in his time, it was the monastic communities were not as isolated as they became in sort of the Middle Ages, and now they're going back to not being as isolated from the community. So I don't know if you get any of that feeling.
Sure. Another example would be St. Augustine. Not when I was back at St. Timothy's, we had a men's group that read together the Confessions of Augustine. And one of the things that struck me was part of Augustine's journey was having a group of friends that talked about spiritual things together. And that gave him the courage ultimately to enter his conversion and to do, you know, what he did after that. And I think in some ways, that's really what the church is being called to, is to find ways to form communities of people who recognize there's a spiritual life that we share that's greater than our merely earthly life. And that out of the strength that we get from each other in that, we meet whatever needs happen to us, you know, or we encounter with others, you know, and, you know, especially here in the United States, the way things are going, the tendency has been just to divide and to separate. And you can say that politically or with, you know, different thoughts about morality or everything else. And to my mind, the answer to that isn't going to be one side wins, one side loses. You've already lost if that's the case. It's going to be, how are we able to form a family together and to accept each other and grow with each other, to get done what needs to be done. You know, I keep telling my congregations, you know, the earliest things that they would say about Christians was, see these Christians, how they love one another. They aren't saying that these days.
It seems that a lot of what we need to do is go back to, you mentioned St. Augustine, I mentioned St. Anthony. In the relative 2,000-year history of the church, they're relative contemporaries, even though they're about 100 years apart. It seems like a lot of what we need to do is go back to the sense of community and sharing and agape love from the early years of the church.
Yes. And, you know, really, we talk about going back, but I'm not so sure. I don't know how you say this exactly. We don't have to even know about that early stuff that is there. That can reaffirm for us that we're heading in the right direction. We just need to listen to what the scriptures say and put it into practice. I mean, I was thinking with St. Anthony, he happened by a church, he heard the word of God, and that word moved him to do something. You know, the readings that we have in these upcoming Sundays, there's a human need, there's a response to it, and that is what created the community. You know, Jesus in the gospel says, this word that I'm proclaiming to you is fulfilled in your hearing. You know, at the wedding feast at Cana, the lack of wine meant Jesus moved up his plans, you know, and did his first public miracle in a place he hadn't quite expected to. His mother said, they have no wine, and do whatever he tells you. And there it was. And it says in John's gospel, his disciples began to believe in him. You know, they began to see his glory.
And as you said a few minutes ago, if you give it all away and trust that God will provide, he provides. Jesus' first public meal at the wedding at Cana, as another priest I like to talk to describes it, then Jesus had a few very large mass picnics where he fed the multitudes with fish.
Yes.
Sort of the first church picnics, or the first spaghetti dinners,
Right.
all leading up to the Last Supper, on which we base our weekly ritual.